Could you not get a bigger bucket, Tim?
All mod cons here.
All mod cons. Yeah, I like the background, by the way.
Yeah, well, I do quite a few meetings this way, so the rest of the house is a pit. But this bit I've kept as
it's
a little nook.
Says what it is on the tin.
It's a good background, yeah, good backdrop for anything that I do, actually.
Yeah, no, it's all right. I get fed up with bookcases, but you've only got one sneaking in at the side.
Yeah, and it is like a library, actually, the rest of the room. So there are many bookcases in this place because I've never got rid of a book. You know, I've had from birth. I've been a reader.
Yes,
and we have a house full of books.
I started off like that because we had our place in front of King Street Library, Stretford, and I was ever in there. And I never read anything these days because I'm always, I don't know. I suppose it's breaking news, isn't it? You're always relying on short bits from a computer.
Yeah, I find I need to read at night. Before I can sleep, I need to read a book, or not a whole book, but I need to. It's just something I got to do.
No, I think it's built in.
And I'm so conscious of having bookshelves of books that I know that I don't now have the time to read. You know, War and Peace is still sitting over there. It's been sitting over there.
Leave it alone, mate. It's bad for you.
Yeah, but no, you suddenly realise that you're on borrowed time, really, you know.
Yes, you do. You do. Your attitude changes.
Educated at a Catholic school, and they were, from the age of 4, they were telling me, don't worry, when you die, you'll have everlasting life. And I'd only just got here. So I wasn't really keen. And the whole thought of, I thought, well, you know, I'd be looking at a watch after the first 1,000 years thinking, is this not ever going to end? I'm quite happy, I think, with my allotted time. I mean, I don't like losing people along the way. That's the hard thing. And of course, you know, that's where religion comes in with the carrot that, don't worry, when we die, you'll have this everlasting life. So it seems a fairly obvious pitch, pitch.
I detect a smidgen of, I don't know.
A smidgen of lapsed Catholic. Yes. A bucketful, I would say. I was 7 when I lapsed, and I was in my first confession, 7 years of age. And the priest said, so tell me your sins, my son. And I was only 7. So I said, well, I didn't take my medicine this morning. And he said, say 2 Hail Marys and an Our Father, and I forgive you of the sin of not taking your medicine. And as a 7-year-old, I thought, oh, come on. This is, you know, and I've never really gone back. So I've always seen the dogma rather than the...
This will keep you off the pills then. I mean, this is great. We should hear about this.
I don't particularly want to die. I'm not looking forward to it, but I do feel that, you know what, I'm pretty lucky. I'm 67 this year. I've met a lot of people who haven't made it this far, that's for sure, in my time. So, you know, you do reach a stage where you can't really complain when your days are numbered. It's like, you know, what do you expect?
Well, I've got to say to our viewers, we're being a bit naughty. We normally start our Spotlight programme from saying, welcome to Spotlight. Well, I say that now, but you've heard a little bit of the normal Tim Quinn, and we go back centuries, Tim.
We do. Yeah, it's the first time the word normal has been used as a description of me. We do. I can't even remember when we first met, but I think it was on the Isle of Wight, and I think it was thanks to that wonderful singer Julie Felix, who I was managing at the time.
You were?
Jane and I were managing, or attempting to manage. And yeah, we did a show there, which was very happy. My first time on the Isle of Wight, and I think it's my last time on the Isle of Wight because I haven't been back. But
well, listen, there's been a breaking news development this morning about the Isle of Wight. Really? And an island possibly off the west coast of Scotland, in that they're trying to do an experiment, the first unlocking down of the Down. obviously with it being a bit separated from the mainland, and equally so in Scotland with 2 or 3 of the islands up there, they're going to try and release the Isle of Wight as being one of the first ones to return to normality.
Well, that's very interesting. That had crossed my mind, not so much with the Isle of Wight, but the Isle of Man, which I visited a lot in my life. That, you know, if you could get a little island like that, would it be possible to do a lot more than you can on a big island like this?
Well, you've got a bit of a dichotomy here, if that's the right word, because of the ferry companies. They have rules that say you've got to get out your car and go in the passenger accommodation when they take you to the Isle of Wight.
Right.
Now, that's very cunning if you think about it. Dare I say that it suits them beautifully, because you go up to the cafe and spend a fortune on £3 and £4 and £5 cups of coffee. So get out your car, you need to, health and safety. Well, they've actually agreed now that you can stay in your car for some journeys, not for all. So if you want to avoid the dreaded corona, that's the way to do it. Avoid the sailings that insist on you going to the cafe. And,
well, I'm not sailing anywhere these days. I am trying to avoid it because I don't particularly want to go just yet. And it doesn't sound like it's a great way to go either. So the only time I step out is to do the weekly supermarket rush, completely masked.
Well, yeah, we're in Portugal, as people can see at the moment, and it's a bit more relaxed here. But they're saying you don't need to wear it, but we suggest perhaps you do, especially. Yeah. So
why take the chance? You know, if it can help a little bit, hey, I'm going masked. Even for people around you, I think they are happier to see, even though I look as if I'm about to rob the place. I think, you know, people are happier to see you masked than not these days.
Many moons ago, well, you went to America, but is it fair to say that you blagged your way there because you started off in a clown's outfit?
I started as a clown. Well, I started as a Catholic schoolboy. And I think I realized when the 60s came that was not really who I was. And it was the 60s. And when I left school, and I left school as soon as I could, and I remember running out of the school gates thinking I'll never return to school, I did something quite quirky because I didn't know who I was. You know, it was the 60s when we were all trying to figure out, who am I? What am I, man? And on a whim, I got on a coach in Liverpool and went up to Blackpool and knocked on a stage door there. 16 years of age, never done anything in my life other than sit at the back of the class and dream. And the stage door was opened by the very first famous person that I was to meet in my life. And his name was Charlie Caroli. And he was very famous clown. He'd been at Blackpool Tower Circus for 40 years, I think, by then. He'd had his own TV series, and he was in full makeup. He opened the door and he looked me up and down and he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Are there any jobs going?" And he stood back, gave me another look, and he said, "Come in." I followed him through the circus, across the ring. I'd never been to the circus, even though I grew up in Liverpool. I'd never been up coast to Blackpool. And it is a magnificent place. Walking across the circus ring and to his dressing room. And he sat me in a chair, and all around the mirror, I remember, were these 100-watt bulbs. And it was like, this is showbiz, man. This is showbiz. And then he went to a cupboard, pulled out this white slop and put it on my face, found a wig, put that on my head. I hardly needed it because I've always had a fair mop of hair. And then he got a fancy outfit. And a day after leaving Catholic school in Liverpool, I was a clown running into the ring as part of Charlie Caroli's troupe of clowns. And his instruction to me was, bring these buckets of water into the ring, throw them at us, but do not hit us. Okay? And I said, I can do this. And so I did. And it was the most bizarre thing to run into the ring, now, of course, surrounded by what seemed to be 10,000 people, all laughing and shouting and cheering. And I threw the buckets of water, missed the clowns, thank goodness. And then I thought, now what do I do? You know, because I'm 16 years of age, I'm self-conscious. And the next thing I knew, Charlie ran up to me, pulled my trousers down to my ankles, grabbed hold of my underpants, pulled them out to here, and poured a bucket of freezing cold water in. And I remember thinking, as everybody roared with laughter, that, well, I'll never feel self-conscious ever again after this. And it was something I recommend to any teenager who's going through being self-conscious. Go and get a job as a clown at Blackpool Town Circus. And I was there for a season.
Tim, it would never happen these days.
Had anybody else opened that door and I'd said, any jobs going, they'd have said, I don't know. You know, it was the perfect moment. It was synchronicity. And synchronicity has followed me through my life. At the end of that season, Charlie came to me and he said, so, do you know who you are yet? And I said, I know I'm not a clown. And he patted me on the back and he said, well done for recognizing that. And I didn't mean that disparagingly to clowns, because I think clowns are magnificent. But you have to be born a clown, I think. Clowns are like Charlie Chaplin, Stan Laurel, Charlie Caroli, Ken Dodd. And I'm not in that, you know, I'm nowhere near those guys. There's a lot of people who say, look, I'm a clown because I put a funny nose on and I got a wig on. Aren't I funny? Children's entertainers. No, you're not. You're just an arse, quite frankly. You have to have that magnificent quality to you to be a real clown. Anyway, Charlie, very kindly, he said, well, look, I'm going into pantomime in a beautiful theatre in Leeds. Why don't you see if you can get a job there? And I didn't have anything better in my mind to do. So I went up to this place called Leeds City Varieties Music Hall. And it was there that I truly found myself, and if you like, my calling in life. Because I remember arriving, and to go to the stage door then, it was down this really dirty alley with lots of bins and even rats running around. I walked in the stage door, and coming down the staircase towards me was a wolf. And when he got to the bottom of the stairs, he looked round at his backside and he went, oh, damn. And then he looked me in the eye and he said, will you rush up to the green room, dear, and see if you can find my tail? And I thought, I've found myself here. This is me. Because they were putting on a show, Red Riding Hood, the panto.
I think, Tim, we can play a bit of a clip, because that theatre is famous worldwide and the people that have been on the stage there. Let's just have a little look at that.
Flaunting, frenetic, farcicalities ad infinitum. Mr. Ken Dodd!
Chuck it! Would you mind telling the Pudsey Philharmonic to jack it in? First folks, I'd like to say, how tickled I am, Mrs. How full of plumptiousness. Yes, they can't touch you for it, love. No, not if you wash your hands and cut your nails. I'd like to say, how tickled I am under the circumstances. What about you, Mrs.? Have you ever been tickled under the circumstances? Under the stairs at dances. Oh, should I tickle my sleeve tonight? Here we go, by Joe. Geronimo! By Joe. First of all, by Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, what? Ladies and gentlemen, be back here. Once again, how do you like to be back here? Here, in the dear... Haven't started yet, Mrs. To be here. How tatty-hilarious, folks. How absolutely discomnicorating. Standing here tonight, here in this beautiful Victorian cash and carry. Standing here tonight, here in this magnificent... Oh, how do I feel? Yes, ghoulified. Here. No, you're allowed to say that, love. If you're from Goole. Unfortunately, I'm not. I'm from Knutsford. Still, it might be worse. What a wonderful thrill, Mrs. Woman, to stand here on this very spot where so many wonderful artists have made their name. Dame Nellie Melba, who dropped the chalk ice down her tights and invented the Knickerbocker glory. Right. What an audience. What a fabulous, all specially invited here this evening so the people at home can laugh at them.
Now, you've got fond memories of Ken, haven't you?
I do. Ken was very kind to me when I was 16, going on 17, I guess. He was the only person who came to the varieties who actually made a point of leaving a tip for the stagehands. Oh. And I became a stagehand there. And that was fantastic, you know, and it irritates me when I hear people say, oh, he was a bit stingy, wasn't he, with his money? No, only to the taxman was he stingy, not to the people that mattered who were us. And he was great. When I returned to Liverpool a few years ago, I became reacquainted with Ken, and we would bump into each other in Liverpool city centre. The first I would know about it would be hearing that familiar voice coming up behind me, and he'd say, "Get your hair cut." And I'd turn around and it'd be Ken, and he'd say, "You know, boy, you will never get anywhere in this business with hair like that." And of course, Ken was like this mop top, you know, he was the original mop top before the Beatles. But he was a lovely, lovely man, and so funny. I mean, he just never stopped. He left us at the City Varieties. We would be weak with laughter at the end of a show there. Just weak, and we loved it so much. He was again a clown, a true clown, and a unique human being.
Yeah, he got inside an audience. He loved the audience. He was a part of it.
Well, it's old style, and there were quite a few, and I was so lucky to rub shoulders with them in those early days. Arthur Askey, Ted Ray, a guy called Albert Modley. I don't know if you remember Albert Modley. Big name in the 30s and 40s, still doing the same act in the 60s and 70s. So it was great to be able to see that, and particularly in such an authentic place, a real live, living music hall. And I started writing scripts while I was there for some of the comedians who came, Little and Large, fantastically funny pair, Jimmy Cricket, and they had TV shows on at the time. So suddenly I was finding myself and believing in myself, something that school had never given me, any self-belief, because I was writing scripts that these guys were actually taking on and making work, whether on their TV shows or on stage.
Tim, how do you feel about modern comedy? I mean, they say edgy. Edgy sometimes can be substituted for filthy. We're talking peer end stuff here. Now that's been discredited. Oh, he's only a peer end comedian. How do you?
I've never thought that, of course. I mean, if it's funny, it's funny. When I went to the US, I got a job in the US, and I was hired by a magazine over there as the humor editor. Get that? Purely based on the fact that I came from Liverpool, and the publisher said, "You're supposed to be funny from Liverpool, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, word on the street is that we're supposed to be funny from Liverpool." So I became the humor editor. And I do remember my first day there, hearing through my office wall, somebody saying, "They've hired an Englishman to be the humor editor on the Saturday Evening Post magazine. How's that going to work?" Which was a fair question. But you know what? I think if something's funny, it's funny. If it's the Marx Brothers, it hardly matters that they're American. No. It translates. And I think there are still some wonderful comedians to this day whose work translates. But you have to sift through to find the really good stuff. I mean, I like people like Ricky Gervais, who I think at his best is magnificent. And then Larry David in the States is superb. Seinfeld is, you know, as good as it gets for me. But then, you know, there's the old timers, you know, people like Ken Dodd, who was still out on the stage a couple of years ago, you know, just before he died. I mean, he had a tour in place when he died, which is typical of the man.
We served our time, I have to say, with Ken Dodd. We've been in a theatre till 2 o'clock in the morning. You're not getting out of here.
No, it was always bring sandwiches and a flask.
That's it.
You know, and hope for the best.
So, listen, when you went to the States, different planet, of course, New York and various places. Now, it's all right saying, you know, you had the gift of the gab. Well, we can see that. But also...
Says you.
Behave yourself. And it's more than that. You've got to have talent, Tim. Come on. You can illustrate things, and, you know, when you see a comic book and you see the illustrations, you sort of pass over them. But when you get into it, they're works of art. And marrying that to the narrative is not easy.
No, it is. Comic books are an art form in their own right. And I'll be the first to say there's plenty of rubbish comic books out there, and there's plenty of wonderful comic books out there. It's the same with any art form. Books. There are a lot of really awful books out there, and there's some great books. So again, you have to sift to find the good stuff, you know. And yeah, I know how good I am, but thank you for pointing it out.
I tell you what, because a lot of it comes through the Mersey Tunnel, as they say. Well, I've got to confess about Liverpool. When we used to live in North Wales, Liverpool was around the corner. And being a Mancunian, there's always been this feeling, not from our side, mind you, but, you know, I suppose it's the football thing. But
you're a Mancunian. You say you're a Mancunian?
Absolutely.
Oh,
is
well,
this conversation going to carry on?
Okay, I'm off. I didn't realise.
No, the thing is, with a Manc and a Liverpudlian, you're always a bit timorous of I've got a film in that theatre, and we filmed in a lot of Liverpool theatres, both art, opera, and then comedy in other theatres. I tell you what, it's our favourite place to film, because the audience had a sense of humour. There was a lot of banter, and we loved it.
Yes, well, as they say, you have to have a sense of humour to live here. But we say that fondly, and we don't really mean it, because we love it. It is, I don't really want to go on and on about how great Liverpool is, because that's irritating to anybody who isn't from Liverpool, and I understand that. But I do feel that it is unique. It's a bit like New York, in that New York isn't connected to America in any way. It's a planet in its own right, and Liverpool is definitely planet Liverpool. It's not connected to Great Britain. It never has been. It is just this bizarre planet floating around the solar system. And I'm very happy that I grew up here, because I think it did leave its mark, and that mark is indelible.
Well, it is, but you also have, as many cities do, and I don't say this in a disparaging way, an attitude against the world, if you wish.
No, it's against hierarchy and authority figures. When I say against, I mean, we're a bit like the little boy in The Emperor's New Clothes. We're ready to shout out, hang on, you're naked. You know, we are that boy. We're not the ones who will nod along. We will shout something out when the hierarchy or people believe themselves to be hierarchy. We can't have that. No. So we do feel it's necessary to just remind them that, hang on a minute, you know, we're all the same, really.
Well, yeah, there's the synergy between Manchester and Liverpool. We have the same attitude. Perhaps it's a northern thing. Listen, about attitudes and about television programmes, Doctor Who. Now, you got the thing going really well, the Doctor Who comic. And you think of the Dalek, and I've got a picture of you somewhere hidden away, and I can't find it, with a Dalek.
Yeah, I've met a few Daleks in my time. Well, I mean, Doctor Who hit me at the perfect age. It started, I just turned 10 when it started back in 63. And it was the only thing to watch on TV that day when it started, because it was November the 23rd, 1963. An important date, as you will remember, you know, because the day before President Kennedy had been shot. So everything on TV was really incredibly gloomy, because that was scary, frightening, shocking, sad. And then Doctor Who popped up in the middle of that schedule. And for a 10-year-old, it was like, wow, what is this show? It was extraordinary. And I was lucky years later to be able to work on comic strips and so on, featuring the Doctor. And I think, like a lot of things that hit you when you were a youngster, it remained with me through my life. I like that form of escape, that you can jump into a telephone box and be anywhere in history. I love that side of it particularly, or anywhere, you know, in the universe. And, you know, over the years, I think it's done itself proud, really, with all the different doctors there have been. It's always taken a different slant with each one.
Tim, the BBC have started preaching to us now, though, and they've got a woman in there. What do you make of that?
I think it's no strange. I think it's a wonder that he hasn't been a woman before, or she hasn't been a woman before. I mean, it's an alien being, and the beauty of being an alien being is the unknown quality. So I think it was a very natural thing to do at some point. I mean, the Doctor can be anything. It is this figure of the unknown. So I think it was quite a nice move to do that, personally. And I don't find it bewildering or strange in the least. I think as a writer.
Ladies, you've had it direct from the source now. You're a strange being.
As strange as, yeah, well, yeah, I would go along with that. Just as, do you not think we're pretty strange? I mean, really, you've been around the block a few times. Face it, we're pretty bizarre as a human race, aren't we? I mean,
we have character, and one thing about the British nation, we're full of characters. It's brilliant.
We're full of something. I'm not sure whether it's character.
Well, listen, we'll get onto more prosaic subjects now. We've both been teachers in our time, and boy, that has changed. And not for the better.
No, not for the better. Ask any teacher worth their salt. I think they would agree with you there. I think it's sad. I think it's sad. Children deserve better. That's my anthem. Children deserve better. When I was a boy, I would have happily sung that song. We deserve better than the education system we were lumbered with. I'm going back to the 1950s now and the early 60s when I was still at school. And it was decrepit. It was, I mean, my textbooks were from the 1880s, for goodness sake. Now, okay, there's some things that don't change, you know, but it was, by the time we were going into the 1960s, it just so much wasn't relevant anymore. And we do change. We do think in a different way as time goes on. Some people can say that's not a good thing, but I think it is a natural thing. And I think we have ups and downs in our lives, and we have ups and downs in our time periods that we're on this planet. And I think it's very easy, especially getting old now, to think, oh, it used to be great, you know, when I was a boy. You can look back, and if you're realistic, you can see that there have been some changes, many changes that have been for the good. And at the same time, you can feel we've lost certain things that maybe we shouldn't have lost. But again, I think that's natural, and it's a new generation coming up all the time, and it should be ever changing. Just as musical tastes change, just as comedy tastes change, I think it's very natural for that to be. You know, my mum and dad were enjoying ITMA and what other programs from the 40s. And while I've listened to them, I can't get the great enjoyment they had from them at the time.
No, but I know what you mean, but there are certain classical times, and that's a nice analogy you've made between education and music, because a lot of people still say the music's not as good as the 60s. It was exceptional. Everybody recognises that.
Well, yeah, and I would say that too.
I thought you might.
But at the same time, yeah, well, you know, I think it's the grey hair speaking.
Well, listen, I came out of college during that era at the end of the 60s, and I had a lovely tutor, and he was just about to retire, and he was giving his little speech in a tutorial to us, and he put his arm around me and said, Rodney, times are changing. It will never be the same. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, the new progressive education, child-centered education, as it was called then, is coming in. And I regret that, he says. And I thought, oh, he's not with it. He's about to retire. Maybe it's a good thing. I thought that anyway. But I tell you what, his words were wisdom. Things changed. When I first came out, I mean, basically, you could teach a class of 48 kids. It's too many. But they were all listening and they accepted the discipline.
You have to communicate with the children. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but you have to. You see, I don't really know how to describe what I do when I go into a classroom, but I know I've been in more classrooms than any teacher you're likely to have met. And I know that I can reach I've only had one bad experience in a classroom, only one. And that's having been in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of classrooms. And so really I can dismiss that. Although of course it preys on my mind, because that is a shame, because I didn't reach those. There were only 6 children in that classroom and I couldn't get them. But part of the reason I couldn't get them was because they had been pushed out of the learning system, because they were disruptive. They were 14 years of age and the education system had lost them completely. And it was very sad. And as aggravating as those 6 kids were, I came away feeling really sad for them, because we, as a community, had allowed them to slip through whatever net that should be there to turn them into productive members of society, to allow them to believe in themselves. They didn't believe in themselves for a second. They hated everything. And to have reached that stage when you're 14 says a lot about the education system today and its failings.
Well, we both feel really sorry, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean, for the state of the kids these days. They're under far more pressure than ever before. They've got
for the wrong reasons too.
Well, one of the reasons I can say, and you realise, is that half the parents break up for one reason or another, and that affects the kids more than anybody. So,
of course it does, and there's nothing really one can do about that, because that's just the way of society at this moment in time. But I think when you do enter the school system, the education system, you are entering society, and there's certain things that need to be followed to allow the child to shine. But you have to be on top of that, and you have to know, you have to think in a childlike manner, not a childish manner, a childlike manner, as to how you can grasp their imagination and make them so they don't end up like me when I was at school, just sitting at the back, looking out the window, waiting for the day that I could be released from that imprisonment so I could actually get out there and get educated myself. And
but Tim, but you did not sit at the back of a classroom and be disruptive. There's the difference. There's the generational difference.
Well, it is, but it's a small step from not really joining in with the lessons to actually disrupting them. And again, this is something that they're not engaged. They're not being engaged. Now, I know that discipline does have to come into this, because by God, if you don't master how to discipline a class up front, then you're doomed as a teacher. It's not going to work. And that is absurd in some schools now. I mean, there was one school deemed good by Ofsted, no less. And while I was there, I was attacked by a boy with a carving knife. A 16-year-old boy came up with a carving knife. Now, he didn't want to kill me. He was showing off in front of his mates, and he was waving the knife in front of my face. Now, as a Liverpudlian, I didn't take to that, and I grabbed hold of him. Of course, uproar in the class, with lots of boys informing me that you can't do that, you can't do that. To which I said, using a certain amount of profanity, it has to be said, that I could, and I am. And I took the boy out of the classroom, knife still in hand, and I said, you're now going to walk across the school with that knife to the headmaster's office, and you're going to tell him that you just tried to kill me. Of course, the boy was saying, oh, no, I wasn't. I was just showing off. I said, no. To me, I believed you were about to kill me. Of course, I didn't. I knew he was just showing off. Simple fact is, he could have hit an artery. He could have got my eye out. He could have, that's how stupid it was. This was a stupid boy, 16-year-old. He was stupid because, guess what? He'd been allowed to get away with all sorts at the school. He had not been disciplined properly. I disciplined him properly that day, sent him off blubbing, which made me laugh, ho. Shouldn't have, should it? Went back in the class, of course, everybody quiet. The head teacher comes in at the end of the lesson, and when all the kids have gone, and he said, oh, Mr. Quinn, I believe you had a problem. I said, yes, you could say that. He said, well, don't worry, I've sorted it out. The boy is going to write you a letter of apology. To which I said, and? Well, that won't happen again. I said, oh, good, I'm glad you're so reassuring. The following day, I was back at that school, and as I walked in, the boy himself was there. He saw me in the school playground. He came over and he spat at my feet. So there's a definite problem within good schools. Thank you, Ofsted. Ofsted had been in for 2 days and believed they had got the cut of the jib of this school. No, they hadn't. Wasn't a horrendous school by any means.
No.
But there was a small percentage of pupils there who were out of control.
Tim, let's be honest, you were a lucky chappie, because in many schools you'd have been yourself brought before the beak. You can't treat children that way.
No, quite. Absolutely. And there is that level of stupidity in society today, which does not do the children any good whatsoever. It's awful that should be there. However, it's not running rampant. And I've been into more schools than anybody else. It's not running rampant. The discipline in most schools is reasonable, I would say, considering where we're at everywhere else. It's a lot better than, say, the discipline that I see in Parliament when I see, but I'm serious. I think the children growing up today are seeing Parliament on TV, seeing that there are no consequences to the actions of these liars, of these people who fiddle their expenses. No consequences whatsoever. And these are our so-called leaders. Are you kidding me? I find that disgraceful. So it's a much bigger problem than pinpointing a few schools where the system is letting the children down. And I say that about the boy who came at me with the knife. I don't like him, but I do recognize that he's still a kid. And he's been let down badly, because when you walk into society, I was lucky when I entered society, it was at Blackpool Tower Circus, and the society there were decent people, the clowns, the acrobats, and so on. And they looked after this very shy, very innocent little boy in their midst. Now, there's a lot of places where people will not be that lucky, you know. But I think it's from top to bottom. And I think because of mass communication now, we're all aware of what goes on in Parliament. We couldn't see it in Churchill's day. I'm sure it was probably pretty close to how it is today in so many ways. You know, it's still a bunch of nitwits running around. But in school, it's such an important part of our future. And when I go in, it's very rare for me to walk away from a school not feeling upbeat because of the children that I've met there. But I also feel that the children deserve better than they're being given. And for me, the big problem in schools is that they're being dictated to by government and local council. And in my experience, government and local council are pretty useless. And they're the last people I would want trying to point children in the way of morality or general citizenship. They don't get it. And certainly they're the last people I would count on for teaching children the arts, which I think are so important to growth in any child. And I'm talking about across the arts here, not just comic books, but across the arts, whether it's television, whether it's music, whether it's dancing, I think it's so important. It's some of the things that Britain is most famous for around the world. You go across the world now, mention you're from Britain, and people will mention, well, usually the Beatles, in my case, people who changed the world for the better, who did these wonderful things that are remembered, whether it's William Shakespeare, whether it's Charles Dickens, whether it's the Beatles, or some of the other amazing actors that we have to this day, you know, who are extraordinary talents.
Tim, you're walking a tightrope, and I sympathise with that because...
it's my circus background.
Well, yes. I mean, basically, we've got a situation here where, in one sense, you're at an advantage because every kid these days wants to be on telly. And they can have their own YouTube channel. So they're going to listen to you. So that's an advantage. But by being part of that modern thing that is very, let's say, hedonistic, I'm the center of everybody's world. That has its drawbacks, Tim.
But it always did. And go back to TV in its infancy and then its growth through the 60s. And there were some magnificent programs put out, and there were some awful programs put out, and there were some real stars made. And if you look into the background of some of those stars, some of them were a real pain in the neck, not to mention any names like Huey Green or whatever. It's going to happen. Again, it's human nature. And, you know, I think of some of the lovely people that I met while I was at the City Varieties, whether it was Ken Dodd or Arthur Askey, people who had been stars for a long time. I mean, my gosh, Arthur Askey had been a star since the 20s.
Yeah.
Now it was, you know, the end of the 60s, early 70s when I met him. He was lovely. And that was just to some little dope 17-year-old.
Yeah.
But there were other people, of course, who let it go to their heads and they become a star. I'm a star, don't you know? It's always going to be a part of it, isn't it? It is. The Beatles, I've been lucky enough to meet a few of them. They were beautiful. And yet, I find that amazing because they were fated from such a young age. I mean, they were about 20, 21 when suddenly everything took off. And, you know, they were treated like gods. And you would have assumed that that would go to their heads of these four little Liverpool scruffs. But it didn't. And indeed, in 1967, very important TV moment, when the whole world was linked up by satellite for the first time, and the Beatles were asked to give a performance and to write a song to celebrate that moment. Well, they could very easily have written a song saying, "Aren't we great?" Because at that point, you know, they were the most loved things on the planet. But instead, they came up with a song called "All You Need Is Love." That was their message to the world. And I just think that for me is, they are the true sons of music hall for me, you know, that they come up with that. There's this joy. And they're the real people to me. So yeah, children now are capable of making their own TV shows, their own radio shows, what have you. They can be seen globally. Some of them, that will go to their heads, of course it will. Others it won't, because they will recognize that the important thing with this beautiful, amazing equipment that we now have is communication. And communication with the world. I mean, how exciting is that? You know, in our day, growing up in Manchester and Liverpool, we at the most, we could communicate, in my case, with the Crosby Herald, which was a little local paper who would be guaranteed to get your name wrong if you got in the printed in there. Now you can go globally. Well, I think that's incredible. And indeed, it is something that I'm wanting to work on myself now, to allow children to meet up with children in other countries so they can recognize that countries that sometimes our governments will say are our enemy, whether it's Iran or Iraq or North Korea, if we can actually have children meeting up with children in these countries to recognize that, hang on, these are children just like us who are growing up in these countries, and most of them want much the same things that we want and are affected by the same things we're affected by, then I think that could be a great thing, particularly to introduce into the education system. And we can do it via what used to be school magazines. Remember when you and I were boys, and if we were lucky, we'd have a school magazine, which could showcase our talents that weren't represented by the school curriculum. You know, maybe you could write a bit, maybe you could draw a bit. There it could appear in this magazine. Well, now we're capable now of creating really wonderful magazines that can look as good as anything on the newsstands. And we can do that from sitting at my desk here. And we can do it in schools, working with children, getting them to create pages that will be entertaining for their fellow pupils and for people around the world. And then we can bring in via Skype, via Zoom, people from around the world to work with children in a school in Liverpool. That's exciting. I mean, I think that's really an incredible, we're so capable now of doing amazing things.
It's absolutely a challenge and true. Finally, Tim, how do you inculcate in children, let's take two words, goodness and humility in the modern setting?
I think we're born with those things in us, but we're born and we're capable of being Jekyll and we're capable of being Mr. Hyde. I think when Robert Louis Stevenson wrote that book, he got it. He got us right. And I don't know about you, Rodney, but I know in my life, I think I'm a fairly nice guy, but I know that at times I have crossed that line into being Mr. Hyde. There've been moments in my life where I have, hard as that might be to believe, looking at that beatific little head. But you know, it's been a long life, and there have been moments where I've crossed that line. So I think the only thing we can do, and I think you and I can help in this, is create good programming. In my case, good comic books, good magazines for children, hoping that a bit of it sticks, because stuff does stick. When I was a kid reading Dennis the Menace or Beryl the Peril in the Topper, I still remember those stories fondly. And although they were a menace and a peril, they were at heart nice kids. And when I started reading about superheroes, I kind of would have liked to be a superhero. So it's something that one could encourage children to be. And they can be superheroes just by reaching out with compassion to their fellow student at school, their fellow being on this planet. There's all sorts we can do, because sitting here in Great Britain, although we're going through this dreadful thing at the moment, we are still one of the richest countries on the planet. And I think, you know, we all recognize that we're very lucky to be living in Britain today.
I still identify with Dennis the Menace. The older I get, the more like him I become.
I can see that.
What, I thought you would. In one sentence, Tim, who do you identify with?
Probably my dad, and I was lucky to have my dad. He was a decent man. He ended up getting the MBE from the Queen, no less, which is astonishing. He felt that kids were being locked up, and he didn't feel that was a good thing. And he created this scheme to keep young offenders out of prison. And what he did with these young offenders was to take them to meet with their victims and to do reparation for their victims, so they could meet face to face. They could see the impact their crime had done on these poor people who had suffered through them, and then get them to actually do some form of reparation for them. Now, when Dad came up with that scheme, it was laughed out of the justice system, but he persevered and he made it work. And he made it work in such a way that eventually it was recognized as working, and eventually he was given the MBE. And a few years later, when he died, at his funeral, I got up in the church to give a speech, and I looked out, and the congregation were made up of what looked like old lags from the underworld, or young lags, I should say, a criminal community, and the Quinn family. My father was so well respected by these people. They recognized what he had done in keeping them out and introducing them to a new lifestyle. And I have to say, Dad used to get me to type up some of his reports. And I used to say, God, Dad, this guy should be in prison, shouldn't he? And he would say, son, we all need that second chance. And I totally get it now. And the more work I do in schools, the more I see how right my dear old dad was.
Tim Quinn, thank you so much.
A pleasure. I salute you, Rodney. All the very best to you.